think I'm back. I think I'm back. I think this worked. I'm not quite sure. I hope it did. So we'll just see. Oh my goodness. I don't know what happened. I think I changed something, some setting. I just need to turn off that image because you don't need that image right now. Right. Hi, how are you? I'm Jev. I'm reading a story to you this afternoon. And I thought I had everything going. I did actually check that my microphone was working, which was wonderful. And then the camera didn't work. But of course, I didn't actually find out that until after I got started. Such is life. Technology is wonderful when it works, and it's wonderful in a very sarcastic tone of voice when it doesn't work. So here we go. Right, where are we up to? We're getting near the end of the book. I was actually just checking slightly earlier on to see how many chapters we had to go. We're up to chapter 11, which is developments, and then we've got 3 more chapters after this. They're all about the same length, fairly long, about 40 pages. So it's 1 chapter per day. Just the way it works, and I will actually need at some stage to fiddle around with the images because I've got some of them queued up. I got them ready last time and we didn't have very many images last time, but this time we've got 1 or 2 one more which I haven't got queued up just because we've had people here right up until a quarter of an hour before I started, and then I had to try and resolve some other issues. Oh well, that's fine. We're all here, we're all okay, thankfully. Jonathan's going to have to arrive again or something like that if he's not still here. He's probably going to have to hit the reload button for it to show as him being here. Anyway, so what are we up to? The weather is reasonable here in New Zealand. It's actually improved, but that meant that I got a headache. I tend to get weather-triggered headaches, which is not fun. You don't really want that. Anyway, what else? There's not a lot else going on over here. Oh, my daughter's up from Wellington, the other end, well, not the other end of the country, up from further south in the country, which is great. The cat is happy. The cat's her cat, but he lives with us. We haven't had any more boats coming ashore, so that's good. Both my parents are doing well. Thank you for checking. Yeah, both of them have had COVID and are over it, which is wonderful. As far as I know, they are. They're not letting on otherwise. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else going on that I need to let you know about. I don't think there is. So what about I just get straight into the story fairly quickly? I can actually set up a jigsaw puzzle for you to do if you're interested. I haven't got it queued up on the screen for you yet, but if you leave a comment in the chat, I will see that and then I can get it going for you. Yes, I do say quite a bit. So let's go through my introduction for those of you who are new here. That's probably a good idea. So, hi, I'm Jev. I read old children's books. These sort of books. Ones that my parents and my grandparents read when they were kids. I actually did read their books. Not this particular one because it wasn't my grandparents'. It was my grandmother's brother's book. And it was given to him in 1897, which is 125 years ago. Anywhere else, and this would be in a museum or a archival library or something like that, but this is just one of the books in our house. It's so old that you can actually feel the texture of where the printing press pressed the letters into the page to transfer the ink. You can feel the dips and the bumps from that when you're looking at the page, running your fingers over the print. And this is the style of the clothing that was being worn at the time that the book was produced. So that's in the Victorian period. Illustrations like that were made by scratching the design onto a printing plate and then rubbing ink onto that, taking the excess off and then pressing it into the page for every single page that was done with an illustration. A lot of work. Unlike print on demand, which we have these days, which is wonderful for the accessibility of printed books. Relatively speaking, the price has not gone up much compared with what they used to be. They used to be worth a lot, which is probably why my family still had a lot of these old books. Anyway, for me, books have always been important. They have helped me to see that the world is much bigger than just where I live and the time period I live in and the style of life that I have going on around me. And I kind of thought that that was a normal understanding for most people until I started to realize that some of the children I was at school with just didn't actually realize that life was different to what they were used to experiencing. I think some of them started to realize when one of our teachers read Charlotte's Web to us when I was at school, by E.B. White, and they got so caught up in the story that it was really quite a moving experience listening to this story after lunchtime every day. The teacher would read us another chapter of it, and we were all quite touched by the story. It left us quite devastated at the end of the story, just because that's the way it goes. And no, I'm not going to give you details. You can go and read the book for yourself. If you are new here, you probably are wondering why I'm reading old books. Apart from the fact that I like old books, I like especially old children's books. Part of the reason I read old books is because I think that we are losing a lot of cultural references that we otherwise would have. Now, there are some books that we're all familiar with, ones like Alice in Wonderland and maybe quite possibly The Railway Children, those sort of ones. And yet there are so many other books that were written in the same time period, in the Victorian and Edwardian eras, which are being lost just because libraries no longer hold those sort of books in stock unless they are particularly popular. Even in books that are written for adults, such as Jane Austen, who wrote for adults. She wrote Pride and Prejudice, but there were a few other books that she wrote too. But unless they are books that are considered cultural icons, classics, they're no longer stocked in libraries because they want the latest and the greatest, because that's what people are wanting to read. They come into the library and they say, have you got such and such by so and so? And it will be on the current bestseller list, or one of Oprah's book lists, or something like that. And so therefore the libraries have this pressure to stock what people want, and there's only a certain amount of room on the shelves in the library for them to be able to put these books, and only a certain amount of budget. So yes, they can have them as digital copies, but even then there's only a certain amount of those that they will stock as well. A lot more, but nowhere near what the range of what's available. So I read books that are out of copyright. They have become public domain books because the authors of them wrote them and died so long ago that they are no longer within copyright. I do believe that people ought to be paid for the work that they do. So I'm not prepared to read somebody's book where the person should still be making something off them unless I have specific permission to, such as the Matariki book, The Seven Kites of Matariki, which I read a month or so ago now. In honour of us having Matariki here in New Zealand, it is a public observance of Māori New Year, which is in winter. And this year it was in July, and it was our first observance of it as a public holiday in New Zealand. But it's like a modern mythical retelling of the origins of Matariki. And it's a children's picture book, and I had permission from the publishers to do so that you guys could enjoy it. If you missed that, then you can actually still watch that video, but it is on YouTube unlisted, and you'll need to request it from me, the link, to be able to view it. And I'm quite happy to share that with you, and the publishers are happy for that to be happening, but you do need to make the request to be able to read it, to be able to listen to that one, or see if it's something that's available in your public library. If you're in New Zealand, it might be, but not likely other places, otherwhere. Did I tell you I had a bit of a headache today? Sorry about that. Yeah, it does tend to confuse my words a bit. And sometimes I will get more lost on the page than I otherwise normally do. Getting lost on the page is quite common when I'm reading. I have ADHD and also autism, and the two of them combined tend to clash. one of them enables me to hyper focus at times. The other one means that I can be focusing on something and then there'll be, oh, distraction. And then I have to try and find, so I can get lost while I'm reading a sentence to you. As my eyes are on the words halfway through a sentence, I can actually still get lost on the page. And then I have to find it. It's quite funny when it happens. We should have some sort of little counting thing going on for that as part of the channel system. I haven't got that one worked out yet, but if anyone's got suggestions, do message me about that. Now, we do have a bit of a community. It's a very, very quiet community, so you can join me on Discord when I remember how to spell it. You can join me over on Discord and the others in the community to be able to chat about any of the books that we've been reading, to make suggestions of the ones that you think might be interesting, might be worth reading. I sometimes remember to get the illustrations for the book that we're currently reading or the one that we read before up there so that you can have a better look at them rather than just seeing them over my shoulder here on the screen. And some of those illustrations really are quite amazing, the detail that's gone into them. What else? I'm part of a group of readers of public domain books here on Twitch, and the group is called Codex, and there is an image of what our logo is there. We all read public domain books. Most of the others also read do other things online, like playing games and chatting with people and all that sort of stuff. Some of the books that are read are children's books, but most of them are books that aren't specifically written for children, so they will be adult books. As far as I know, I'm the only one in Codex who specifically reads just children's books. Not a problem, just that if you're looking for somebody else who reads just children's books, then you might have to look a little bit harder. If you are unaware of it, I do actually put the videos after I have read them to you. About 2 weeks after I've read them, they will get transferred to YouTube. I will give you the link for my YouTube channel. And then over there, if you've missed out on parts of a book, that's a great way to catch up. You can go over to my YouTube channel and go to the playlist section, and each of the books is saved into a I'm just hitting my microphone and hopefully that wasn't too loud in your ears. Each of the books is saved into a playlist. So if you wish to, you can actually listen all the way through a book. You will still get all of this chat at the beginning and at the end, and maybe in chapter breaks and things like that. But you will also get the whole of the story overall will be in that playlist for each of the books. I'll also give you the Discord link for Codex in case you want to join in. You don't have to be a reader to join the Codex Discord server. It's a great way to catch up with who the actual readers are, get to know them a little bit better, but also talk about other things to do with reading of public domain books and stuff like that. Get to know the readers a bit that way. And if you want to actually follow any of the other readers on Twitch, down below my video window, if you're watching this live rather than as a recording on Twitch, I have it's actually on my About Me page. There's a section down there which has the header Codex, and there's links to all of the Discord channels, the Twitch channels on for the different Codex readers. And if you go follow those links, you can follow them, then Twitch will notify you when they are live, and so you can have some more stories read to you. So there you go, that's how it goes. Right, I think that's about it. Oh, I haven't given you my 3 tips. My 3 tips for people who are here that aren't familiar with them. Tip number 1, something to drink. Tip number 2, snacks. Tip number 3, somewhere comfortable. So I always make sure I have water to drink. This is my old water bottle that I used to use all the time. I don't now because it tips over very easily and could make a bit of a mess of the technology. We don't want that happening. So have something to drink handy. Water is great. Always have water handy. It helps your brain and your body to work well. I actually usually drink from this instead. Sometimes I will actually have a cup of coffee handy because that's my favourite drink. Water I'm happy to drink, but coffee's my favourite. So something to drink, sorry. Snacks. What do we have in the treat jar today? Yep, there you go. Look, did you see I've done an update to my coffee QR code with some colour now. So in my treat jar we have today, we have Tio Pablo corn chips. They're yummy, scrummy, noisy, crunchy, but very yummy. And they have a variety of flavour in them. Actually, I'll just pull one out and show you. Just because they always intrigue me with the range of colour that they have in them. Let's see if I can find a purple one. There we go. There's a purple one. So here you go. And they're all out of, those are natural colours from different types of corn. So there's purple, there's white, and there's yellow corn to produce the different colours in them. And they've got different flavours on them too. Yes, it's a noisy bag. So I'm just going to put it down over there and leave it alone. And so drinks, snacks, comfort. And comfort is, the reminder for that is my cushion. It's lovely and squishy, but not too flat. Beautiful purple. It's got a nice texture of the flocking on it, so I can just remind myself, you know, just calm down. All those sort of things. So make sure you've got somewhere comfortable to sit if you're able to just spend your time sitting and listening. If you aren't, if you are doing homework, if you're doing housework, if you're at work, working, and have got me chatting away in the background reading to you, that's fine. You carry on with what you're doing, but I do hope that your work seat, if you have to sit down for work, is a comfortable one and not too uncomfortable for you while you're actually studying or whatever it is that you're doing. Right, so how about we get on with reading the story? I'm just going to move this over. Sorry, I have a little clock that I put on my main screen just before I start to help me keep track of how much time has passed before I get started. Make sure I push the go button at the right time, things like that. Right, I think I've said that one before too. Here we go. How about we read? Hi, I'm Jev. I'm reading The House of Arden by Edith Nesbit, and we are reading chapter 11, which is called Developments. I will give you possibly the last sentence or two from our previous chapter just to give us some continuity. This particular book, this author has actually tended to flow from one section to another from chapter to chapter and left you thinking, oh, hang on a minute, what was it that happened before we started this chapter? Her other ones have had a little bit more of a separation between chapter sections, so you're not left wondering what they're talking about when you start the next chapter. This one, she's really hooked us. So you can never tell with them photo machines, can you? Said Mrs. Honeysett sympathetically. So she's the housekeeper. My husband's cousin's wife had her photo taken, with all her family by her own back door, and when they come to wash out the picture, it turned out they'd took the next door people's water butt by mistake, owing to their billy goat jogging the young man's elbow that had got the camera, and it wasn't a bit like any of them. So yeah, they're talking about developing these photos that they have taken back in this other time period and wondering if they're going to come out. I'm just going to see if I can find out what the time period was that they were in. I know I should know this, but I can't remember it. So the Wikipedia page on this book is very, very short because it's not one of the author's more well-known books. The gunpowder plot was when that was the time period that they have just come back to their own present day from. Their own present period is 1907, 1908, which is about the time that the book was published. So 1605 is the period that they've just had their latest adventure in, and they had taken a box brownie camera with them to take photos of what the castle that the house is built in the ruins of used to look like, so that they could, if they ever find the family treasure, rebuild the castle to what it used to look like. So, anyway, so that's that period was 1605, the gunpowder plot. They had met Sir Walter Raleigh and the children had escaped using a stratagem that they had learnt in history lessons at school, and yet the stratagem, historically, the stratagem of Lady Nithsdale was used in 1717, so it hadn't actually happened yet in that timeline. So they're back in their own timeline now, which is 1907, approximately 1907, 1908, and they are about to get on with what happens with seeing if they can develop these photographs. So I was saying just before for Q and Jonathan, because I know they're here now, if you want the jigsaw puzzle, let me know. I need to actually get it up on the screen for you if you do want to be doing the jigsaw puzzle. Right, so what they're wanting to do is develop these photographs and see if they've turned out. So what do you reckon? Do you think they have? We'll find out, won't we? So chapter 11, developments. Sorry, the edges of my mouth just suddenly got itchy. Come on, said Edred. You measure out the hypo and put the 4 pie dishes ready. I'll get the water. He got it because this is back in the day where all photographs were black and white unless they were coloured afterwards using tinting inks. The actual photograph itself was black and white, and so you could develop it yourself if you had the chemicals. It's a fairly straightforward process. He got it with I'll get the water. He got it with Mrs. Honeysett's help. 2 brimming pails full. You mustn't come in for anything, will you, Mrs. Honeysett? He earnestly urged. You see, if the doors open ever so little, all the photographs will be done for, because he's talking about developing the film at this stage, not the photographs. The film, you don't want any light whatsoever at the development stage, because otherwise it actually bleaches out and you can't actually see anything worth seeing in the photographs. Lor, love a duck, said Mrs. Honeysett, holding her fat waist with her fat hands. I shan't come in. I ain't got nothing to come in for. We'll bolt the door all the same, said Edred when she had gone, in case she was to think of something. He shot the great wooden bolt. That means he pushed the bolt across so it was locked. Now it'll be quite dark, he said. And of course it wasn't. You know the aggravating way rooms have of pretending to be quite dark until you want them to be dark, and then by no means. This room didn't even pretend to be dark to begin with. Its shutters had 2 heart-shaped holes in, high up, through which the light showed quite dazzlingly. Edred had to climb up on the window seat, stuff up the holes very tight with crushed newspaper to get which he had to unbolt the door, the newspaper, to get it. There, he said as he pulled and patted the newspaper till it really and darkly filled the heart-shaped holes. Now it will be quite dark. And again it wasn't. Long, dusty rays of light came through the cracks where the hinges of the shutters were. Newspapers were no good for them. The door had to be unbolted, and Mrs. Honeysett found, and here we have the first picture, first illustration. There's Mrs. Honeysett. And Mrs. Honeysett found she was sitting in a little low chair at the back door, plucking a white chicken. The sight of the little white feathers fluffing about, brought wonderful memories to Edred. The birds, what were they? Geese, swans, whatever, in the previous chapter that had rescued them, taken them away from the danger that they were in when they jumped out of the window. Had the wonderful memories to Edred. But he only said, I say, you haven't any old curtains, have you? Thick ones, or thin, if they were red. So there she is, she's plucking a chicken. There's the chair, and he's just poked his head out the door. This is the feathers floating down from where she's plucking them onto probably some newspaper, just to keep it neat and tidy and easy to bundle up. Right, carrying on. Mrs. Honeysett laid the chicken down among his white feathers. His? Okay, probably a rooster then, if that's the case. And went to a chest of drawers that stood in the kitchen. Here you are, she said, handing out 2 old red velvet curtains, with which he disappeared, but he was back again quite quickly. "You haven't got a hammer, I suppose," said he. The dresser drawer yielded a hammer, and Edred took it away to return almost at once with, "I suppose there aren't any tacks?" "I suppose," said Mrs. Honeysett, laughing, "there ain't much sense locking that still room door on the inside when it ain't me that keeps all a-popping in, but you that keeps all a-popping out." However, she gave him the tacks, rusty ones, and a damp twist of paper. When he had hammered his fingers a good deal and the tacks a little, the tacks consented to hold up the curtain, or the curtain condescended. The first one is consented, the second one is condescended, to be held up by the tacks. "And now," said Edred, shutting the door, "it really is dark," he meant, but of course it wasn't. There was a gap under the door so wide, as Elfrida said, that you could almost have crawled through it. That meant another appeal to Mrs. Honeysett for another curtain, and this time Mrs. Honeysett told him to go along with him for a little worrit, and threw a handful of downy soft white feathers at him, but she laughed too, and gave him the curtain. At last it really was dark. Then they had to unbolt the door again because Elfrida had forgotten where she had put the matches. Yeah, they wouldn't have had any light to be able to see where anything is. You will really understand that after all this preparation, the children were at the last point of impatience, and everything seemed to go slowly. The lamp with the red shade burned up presently, and then the 4 pie dishes were filled with water that looked pink in that strange light. "One good thing," said Edred, "the hypo has had time to melt, so it's a chemical that has to be dissolved in the water." And now there was the careful snipping, and long ribbons of black paper curled unheeded round the legs of the operators. "I wish we were born photographers like the man who took Aunt Edith and you on the beach with the donkey," said Edred nervously, as he began to pass the film in and out of the water in pie dish number 1. "Oh, be sure there are no air bubbles," said Elfrida. "You might let me do some of it." "You shall do the next one," said Edred, almost holding his breath. Dear reader, do you recall the agitating moment when you pass the film through the hypo and hold it up to the light and nothing happens? Do you remember the painful wonder whether you may have forgotten to set the shutter? Because cameras back then were manual, so you had to set everything up properly to make it work. Or whether you have got hold of an unexposed film by mistake and therefore it's not going to show anything. Your breath comes with difficulty, your fingers feel awkward, and the film is unnaturally slippery. You dip it into the hypo bath again and draw it through and through with the calmness of despair. "I don't believe it's coming out at all," you say, and then comes the glorious moment when you hold it up again to the red light and murmur rapturously, "Ah, it's beginning to show." If you will kindly remember all the emotions of those exciting moments, on an occasion, let us say, when you had not had your camera very long, then multiply it by 7,000,000, add an X, an unknown quantity of an emotion quite different from anything you have ever felt, and you will have some idea of what Edred and Elfrida felt when the first faint, grey, formless patches began to appear on the film. But you might multiply till you had used up the multiplication table and added X's as long as you could afford them, and yet never imagine the rapture when the 2 children saw the perfect development of the 6 perfect little pictures. For they were perfect. They were perfect pictures of Arden Castle at a time when it, too, was perfect. No broken arches, no crumbling wall, but every part neat and clear-cut as they had seen it when they went into the past that was 300 years ago. They were equally fortunate with the second film too. It too had its 6 faultless pictures of Arden Castle 300 years ago. And the last film developed just as finely. So obviously these films were ones that only would hold 6 photographs. Not like the newer ones where it's a lot longer than that. Hang on. And the last film developed just as finely, only just before the moment which was the right moment for taking the film out of the hypo bath and beginning to wash it, a tiny white feather fell out of Edred's hair into the dish. It was so tiny that in the dim light he did not notice it, and it did not stick to the film or do any of those things which you might have feared if you had seen the little white thing flutter down. It may have been the feathers doing. I don't know. I just tell you the thing as it happened. Of course, you know that films have to be pinned up to dry. Well, the first film was pinned on the right-hand panel of the door, and the second film was pinned on the left-hand panel of the door. And when it came to the third, the one that had had the little white feather dropped near it, there was nothing wooden left to pin it to, for the walls were of stone, nothing wooden except the shutters. And it was pinned across these. Doesn't matter, said Edred, because we needn't open the shutters till it's dry. And with that he stuck in 4 pins at its 4 corners and turned to blow out the lamp and unbolt the door. He meant to do this, but the door, as a matter of fact, wasn't bolted at all, because Edred had forgotten to do it when he came back with the dusters, so he couldn't have unbolted it anyway, but he could blow out the red-sided lamp, and he did. And then the wonderful thing happened. Of course, the room ought to have been quite dark. I'm sure enough trouble had been taken to make it so. But it wasn't. The window where the shutters were, the shutters that the film was pinned on, the film on which the little white feather had fallen, the little white feather that had settled on Edred's hair when Mrs. Honeysett had plucked that chicken at the back door, that window now showed as a broad oblong of light, and in that broad oblong was a sort of shining, a faint sparkling movement, like the movement of the light on the sheet of a cinematograph before the pictures begin to show. "Oh," said Elfrida, catching at Edred's hand. What she did catch was his hair. She felt her way down his arm and so caught what she had meant to catch and held it fast. "It's more magic," said Edred ungratefully. "I do wish—" "Oh, hush," said Elfrida. "Look, oh, look!" The light, broad oblong suddenly changed from mere light to figures, to movement. It was a living picture, rather like a cinematograph, but much more like something else. The something else that it was more like was life. It seemed as though the window had been opened, as though they could see through it into the world of light and sunshine and blue sky, the world where things happen. There was the castle, and there were people going across the drawbridge, men with sacks on their backs, and a man with a silver chain round his neck and a tall stick in his hand was standing under the great gateway, telling them where to take the sacks, and a cart drove up with casks, and they were rolled across the drawbridge and under the tall arch of the gate tower. The men were dressed. Then something blinked, and the scene changed. It was indoors now, a long room with many pictures on one side of it and many windows on the other. A lady in a large white collar and beautiful long curls, very like Aunt Edith, was laying fine dresses in a chest. A gentleman, also with long hair and with a great deal of lace about his collar and cuffs, was putting jugs and plates of gold and silver into another chest, and servants kept bringing more golden grand things, and more and more. Edred and Elfrida did not say a word. They couldn't. What they were looking at was far too thrilling, but in each heart the same words were uttered: "That's the treasure!" And each mind held the same thought: "If it only goes on till the treasure's hidden, we shall see where they put it, and then we can go and find it." I think myself that the white Mouldiwarp was anxious to help a little. I believe it had arranged the whole of this exhibition so that the children might get an idea of the whereabouts of the treasure, and so cease to call on it at all hours of the day and night, with the sort of poetry which even a mole must see is not very good. They've had to learn to write poetry in their heads to be able to summon the Mouldiwarp. However this may be, it was a wonderful show. One seemed to see things better somehow like that through the window that looked into the past than one did when one who was really in the past taking an active part in things that were going on. There appeared at any rate to be no doubt that this really was the treasure, and still less that it was a treasure both plentiful and picturesque. Quickly and more quickly the beautiful rich things were being packed into the chests. More and more pale looked the lady, more and more anxious the gentleman. The lady was taking from her waiting woman little boxes and bundles with which the woman's apron was filled, and the chest before which she was kneeling was nearly full when the door at the end of the gallery opened suddenly, and Elfrida and Edred, in the dark, in the still room, were confronted with the spectacle of themselves coming down the long gallery towards that group of chests and treasure and hurried human people. They saw themselves in blue silk and lace and black velvet, and they saw on their own faces fear and love, and the wonder what was to happen next. They saw themselves embraced by the grown-ups, who were quite plainly father and mother. They saw themselves speak, and the grown-ups reply. I'd give all my pocket money for a year to hear what they're saying, Edred told himself. That daddy's just like my daddy, Elfrida was telling herself, and just like the daddy in the tower was so like my own daddy. Then now I've got the hiccups. Then the children in the picture kneeled down, and the daddy in the picture laid his hands on their heads, and the children out of the picture bent their own heads there in the dark still room, for they knew what was happening in the picture. Elfrida even half held out her arms, but it was no good. Again the scene changed. A chest was being carried by 4 men, who strained and staggered under its weight. They were carrying it along a vaulted passage by ropes that passed under the chest and over their shoulders. Every now and then they set it down and stretched and wiped their faces, and the picture kept on changing, so that the children seemed to be going with the men down a flight of stairs into a spacious hall full of men, all talking and very busy, with armour and big boots. And then across the courtyard, full of more men, very busy too, polishing axes and things that looked like spears, cleaning muskets and fitting new flints to pistols, and sharpening swords on a big grindstone. Edred would have loved to stay and watch them do these things, but they and their work were gone quite quickly, and the chest and the men who carried it were going under an archway. Here, one of the men wanted to rest again, but the others said it was not worthwhile, they were almost there. It was quite plain that they said this, though no sound could be heard. Now we shall really know, said Edred to himself. Elfrida squeezed his hand. That was just what she was thinking too. The men stopped at a door, knocked again, and yet once more. And curiously enough, the children in the still room could hear the sound of the knocking quite plainly, though they heard nothing else. The men looked at each other across the chest that they had set down. Then one man set his shoulder to the door. There was a scrunching sound, and the picture disappeared, went out, and there were the shutters with the film pinned across them, and behind them the door open, and Mrs. Honeysett telling them that dinner, which was roast rabbit and a boiled hand of pork, would be cold if they didn't make haste and come along. "Oh, Mrs. Honeysett," said Elfrida with deep feeling, "you are too bad, you really are." "I hope I've not spoiled the photos," said Mrs. Honeysett, "but I did knock 3 times, and you was that quiet I was afraid something had happened to you, poisoned yourselves without thinking or something like that." "It is too bad," said Edred bitterly. It's much too bad. I don't want any dinner. I don't want anything. Everything's spoiled." Oh dear. Q says, imagine if they took pictures of famous past people to sell or get portraits for their place when it's repaired. That would be wonderful, wouldn't it? Would have been wonderful, yeah. "Perhaps," said Mrs. Honeysett, patiently. She has been so patient with these children. I might have gone on knocking longer, only I thought the door was bolted. You did so keep on a bolting of it at the beginning, didn't you? So I just got hold of the handle to try it, and it comes open in my hand. Come along now, lovey, don't bear malice now. I didn't go for to do it, and I'll get you some more of whatever it is that's spoiled, and you can take some more photos tomorrow. You might have known we were all right, said Edred, still furious, but both thought it only fair to say it wasn't the photographs that were spoiled, and they said it at the same moment. Then what was it? Said Mrs. Honeysett, and do come along for goodness sake and eat your dinner while it's hot. It was a different sort of picture, said Elfrida with a gulp, and it was a pity. Never mind, love, said Mrs. Honeysett, who was as kind as a grandmother, and I can't say more than that. There's a lovely surprise coming by and by for good little girls and boys, and the rabbit'll be stone cold if you don't make haste. Leastways, it would have been if I hadn't thought to pop it in the oven when I came to call you, knowing full well what your hands would be like after all that messing about with poison and dishes, and if I was your aunt I'd forbid it downright. And now come along and wash your hands, and don't let's have any more nonsense about it. Do you hear? I dare say you noticed that Mrs. Honeysett was quite cross at the end of this speech, and quite coaxing and kind at the beginning. She had just talked herself into being cross. It's quite easy. I dare say you've often done it. It was a silent dinner, the first silent meal since the children had come to Arden Castle. They've probably had so much to talk about all these other times. You can judge of Edred's feelings when I tell you that he felt as though the rabbit would choke him, and refused a second helping of gooseberry pie with heartfelt sincerity. Elfrida did not eat so much as usual either. It really was a bitter disappointment to have been so near seeing where the treasure was, and then, just because they hadn't happened to bolt the door that last time, all was in vain. Mrs. Honeysett thought they were sulking about a silly trifle, a silly little nonsense thing, and nearly said so when Edred refused the pie. It was at the end of dinner that Elfrida, as she got down from her chair, saw Mrs. Honeysett's face, and saw how different it looked from the kind face that she usually wore. She went over to her very slowly, and very quickly threw her arms round her and kissed her. "I'm sorry we've been so piggy," she said. "It's not your fault that you're not clever enough to know about pictures and things, is it?" If Mrs. Honeysett hadn't been a perfect dear, this apology would have been worse than none. It's a bit of an insult, really. But she was a perfect dear, so she laughed and hugged Elfrida, and somehow Edred got caught into the hug and the laugh, and the three were friends again. The sky was blue, and the sun began to shine. And then the two children went down to old Beale's. There were roses in the garden now, and white English flags and lupins and tall foxgloves bordering the little brick path. Old Beale was sitting on a brown Windsor chair, as Edred said, in the sun by his front door. Now, do you know what a Windsor chair is? I shall find you a picture of a Windsor chair. I have a Windsor chair, and I'm not going to get it up and wave it at you because it's holding up my green screen. That's not what they're specifically noted for, by the way. It's just that mine is. A Windsor chair. I'll see if I can find one that's more along the lines of the shape that I'm familiar with. What's quite funny about this sort of thing when I look them up is I have a picture in my mind of a very simple Windsor chair, because that's all the ones that I have seen have been these simple ones. And then when you go and look them up online, they're all so blimmin' fancy. That's probably why they still exist, that people have collected them, is because they're these fancy versions. Right, this one will have to do. I shall save this image for you, and then you can see what they look like. Right, and I shall find the right place to open it up for you. This is one version of a Windsor chair. Oops, let's do that. So the one I've got doesn't have this arch on the back at the top. It only has this arm that comes around like this, and it sort of fits around you, and you sit in the middle on the seat here, and then it's got these wooden legs. That's a fairly simple one. Some of them have got a straight bit across the top instead of the arch there, but all of the ones that I know, this bar here and the curve it makes is one of the key points of what makes it a Windsor chair. I'm not sure why, it just is, but they're very comfortable if you happen to get a genuine old one. So right, we shall carry on. So Beale was sitting in his Windsor chair on a brown Windsor, well, they're just plain timber. They're not fancy. So that's why it refers to it being a brown Windsor chair. Probably as opposed to a painted one, because I think sometimes they were painted white. I'll carry on then. Too much information going on. Old Beale was sitting on a brown Windsor chair, as Edred said, in the sun by his front door. Over his head was a jackdaw in a wicker cage. And Elfrida, sorry, my nose is itchy. Trying to get that off screen. And Elfrida did not approve of this till she saw that the cage door was open. Let's find out if this picture in the story is, oh, okay, it's that version of a Windsor chair. It's slightly different to the one that I showed you. This one is an upright back. It does actually have the bar that goes around, but this one also has a bit that goes up with a different sort of curve on the top. So there's the jackdaw in the cage, but the door of the cage is open. And there's the two children. Over his head was a jackdaw in a wicker cage, and Elfrida did not approve of this till she saw the cage door was open, and that the jackdaw was sitting in the cage because he liked it, and not because he must. She had been in prison in the tower, you remember, and people who have been in prison never like to see live things in cages. There was a tabby and white cat of squarish shape sitting on the wooden threshold. I think that's what this is here. Unless that's a dog. I can't quite tell from this angle. I'll carry on reading. No, right. So you can't quite see the cat in the picture. Why are cats who live in country cottages almost always tabby and white and squarish? The feathery tail of a brown spaniel flogged the flags lazily in the patch of shade made by the water butt. So that's the spaniel. That's why it's got long droopy ears. And I'm just going to turn the picture off because it's distracting me. Sorry. You'll have to reimagine it or get me to post it over on the Discord server. Remind me to. It was a picture of rural peace, and old Beale was asleep in the middle of it. I am glad to tell you that Lord Arden and his sister were polite enough to wait till he woke of his own accord instead of shouting, "Hi!" or rattling the smooth brown iron latch of the gate, as some children would have done. They just sat down on the dry, dusty bank opposite his gate and looked at the blue and white butterflies and the flowers and the green potato tops through the green-grey garden palings. That's the fence slats. And while they sat there, Elfrida had an idea, so sudden and so good that it made her jump. But she said nothing, And Edred said, "Pinch the place hard, and if it's still there, you'll kill it, perhaps." For he had thought she had jumped because she had been bitten by an ant. It's a good solution in case you need it, for just a normal ant bite. When they had finished looking at the butterflies and the red roses and the green growing things, they looked long and steadily at old Beale, and of course he awoke, as people always do if you look at them long enough and hard enough. And he got up, rather shaking, and put his hand to his forehead and said, "My lord," "How are you?" said Elfrida. "We haven't found the treasure yet, but ye will, said old Beale. "Come into the house now. Or will ye come round along of the arbour and have a drink of milk?" "We'd as soon stay here," said Edred. They had come through the gate now, and Edred was patting the brown spaniel while Elfrida stroked the squarish cat. "Mrs. Honeysett said you knew all the stories." "Ah," said old Beale, "a fine girl, Mrs. Honeysett. Her father had Selling Farm, where the fairies churn the butter for the bride, so long as there's no cross words. They don't ever get too much to do, them fairies." He chuckled, sighed, and said, "I know a power of tales, and I know, always I do, which it is that people want. What you're after is the story of the East House, isn't it now? Is the old man a failing of his wits, or isn't he?" "We want to know," said Edred, companionably sharing the flagstone with the feather-tailed spaniel, "the story about why that part of the house in the castle is shut up and all cobwebby and dusty and rusty and musty, and whether there's any reason why it shouldn't be all cleaned up and made nice again, if we find the treasure, so that we've got enough money to pay for new curtains and carpets and things. That's a good point, not just why it's shut up, but if there's any reason why it can't be repaired. Because if there's a good reason, there's no point in trying to do it, because you're just going to waste your time." "It's a sad tale, that," said old Beale. "A tale for old folks, or middle-aged folks, let's say, not for children." "Oh dear, maybe that's to do with people not getting on well together." You'd never understand it if I was to tell you, likely as not." "We like grown-up stories," said Elfrida with dignity, and Edred added, "We can understand anything that grown-ups understand if it's told us properly. I understand all about the laws of gravitation and why the sun doesn't go round the earth but does the opposite. I understood that directly Aunt Edith explained it, and about fixed stars and the spectroscope and microbes and the equator not being real and heaps of things." "Ah," said old Beale admiringly, "you'll be a bustin' with book larnin' before you come o' your 21. I lay. I only hope the half of it's true and they're not deceiving you, a trusting innocent. I never did hold myself with that about the sun not moving. Why, you can see it a-doing of it with your own naked eyes any day of the week." "You wouldn't deceive anyone," said Elfrida gently. "Do tell us the story." So old Beale began, and he began like this. In that picture we had the cat, by that stage that the picture was referenced, was sitting on Elfrida's knee on her lap. There you go. "It was a long time ago, before my time even, it was, but not so long afore, 'cause I can remember my father talking about it. He was coachman at the castle when it happened. So, of course, He knew everything that there was to know, my mother having been the housekeeper and gone through it all with the family. There was a Miss Elfrida then, same as there is now, only she was older than what you are, missy. And the gentlemen lads from far and near, they come a-courting of her, for she was a fine girl, a real beauty, with hair as black as a coal, and eyes like the sea when it's beaten up for a storm. Before the white horses comes along, that's the breaking waves, white horses, in that context. So I've heard my father say, not that I ever see her myself, and she kept her pretty head in the air and wouldn't turn it this way or that for e'er a one of them all. And the old lord he loved her too dear to press her against her wish and will, and her so young, so she stayed single and watched the sea. What did she do that for? Said Edred. To see if her sweetheart's ship wasn't a-comin' home, for she'd got a sweetheart, right enough she had, unbeknown to all. It was her cousin Dick, a ne'er-do-well, if ever there was one, and it turned out afterwards she'd broken the sixpence with him and swore to be ever true, and he'd gone overseas to find a fortune, and so she watched the sea every day regular, and every day regular he didn't come. But every day another young chap used to come a-riding, a fine young gentleman and well-to-do, but he was the same kidney as Master Dick, only he'd got a fine fortune, so his wild oats never got a chance to grow strong like Dick's. Poor Dick, said Elfrida. Not so fast, missy, said the old man. Well, her father and mother, they said, have him that's here and loves you dear, as the saying is. A free one he was, and his christened name Arnold, and she says no, but they keeps on saying yes, and he keeps on saying do, so they wears her down, telling her Dick was drowned for dead, and absolutely sure, and I don't know what all, and at last she says, very well then, I'll marry you. If you can stand to marry a girl that's got all her heart in the sea along of a dead young chap as she was promised to. And the wedding was set for Christmas, Miss Elfrida. She slept in the room in the east house that looks out towards Arden Knoll, and the servants in the attics, and the old people in the other part of the house. And that night, when all was asleep, I think she'd heard a tap-tap at her window, and at first she'd think it was the ivy, but no. So presently she'd take heart to go to the window, and there was a face outside that had climbed up by the ivy, and it was her own true love that they'd told her was drowned. How splendid, said Edred. How dreadful for Mr. Frewen, said Elfrida. That's what she thought, miss, and she couldn't face it. So she puts on her riding coat and she gets out of the window and down the ivy with him and off to London. And in the morning, when the bells began to ring for her wedding and the bridegroom came, there wasn't no bride for him. She left a letter to say she was very sorry, but it had to be. So then they shut up the east house. So that's the story, said Elfrida. Half of it, miss, said old Beale, and he took out a black clay pipe and a screw of tobacco, and very slowly and carefully filled the pipe and lighted it before he went on. They shut up the east house where she'd been used to sleep, but it was kept swept and dusted, and the old folks was broken-hearted, for never a word came from Miss Elfrida, and if I know anything of the feelings of a parent, they kept on saying to each other, she might ha' trusted us, she might ha' known we'd never ha' denied her nothing. And then one night there was a knock on the door, and there was Miss Elfrida, that was, Mrs. Dick now, with her baby in her arms. Mr. Dick was dead, sudden, in an accident, and she'd come home to her father and mother. They couldn't make enough of the poor young thing and her baby. She had her old rooms, and there she lived, and she was getting a bit happier and worshipping of her baby, and the old people worshipping it and her too. Then one night someone comes up the ivy, same as Master Dick did, and takes away not her, but the baby." "How dreadful," breathed Elfrida. "Did they get it back?" "Never, and never a word was ever found out." Sorry, itchy nose again. "And never a word was ever found out about who took it or why or where they took it to. Only a week or two after, Mr. Freeman was killed in the hunting field, and as they picked him up, he said, 'Elfrida, tell Elfrida,' and he was trying to say what they was to tell him when he died. Some folks hold as 'twas him stole the baby to be even with her for jilting him, or else to pretend to find it and get her to marry him out of gratitude. But no one'll ever know, and the baby's mother, she wore away bit by bit to a shadder, and then she died, and after that the East House was shut up for good and all, to fall into rot and ruin like it is now. Don't you cry, missy. I knowed you wouldn't like the story, but you would have it. But don't you cry. It's all long ago, and she and her baby and her young husband's all been happy together in heaven this long time now, I lay." "I do like the story," said Elfrida, gulping, "but it is sad, isn't it?" "Thank you for telling it," Edred said, "but I don't think it's any good, really, being unhappy about things that are so long ago and all over and done with." "I wish we could go back into the past and find the baby for her," Elfrida whispered, and Edred whispered back, "It's the treasure we've got to find. Excuse our whispering, Mr. Beale. Thank you for the story. Oh, and I wanted to ask you, who owns the land now? All the land about here, I mean, that used to belong to us Ardens." "That Jackson chap," said old Beale, "him that made a fortune in the soap boiling. The tallow king, they call him, but he's got too rich for the house he's got. He's bought a bigger place in Yorkshire that used to belong to the Duke of Sanderstead, and the Arden lands are to be sold next year, so I'm told." "Oh," said Edred, clasping his hands, "if we could only find the treasure and buy back the land. We haven't forgotten what we said the first time. If we found the treasure, we'd make all the cottages comfortable and new thatch everywhere." "That's a good lad," said old Beale. "You make haste and find the treasure, and if you don't find it, never fret. There's ways of helping other folks without finding of treasure, so there is. You come and see old Beale again, my lord, and I shouldn't wonder but what I'd have a white rabbit for you next time you come along this way." "He is an old dear," said Elfrida as they went home, "and I do think the films will be dry by the time we get back, but perhaps we'd better not print them till tomorrow morning." "There's plenty of light today," said Edred, and Elfrida said, "I say." "Well, did you notice the kind of clothes we wore in those pictures, where they were stowing away the treasure?" "Oh," groaned Edred, recalled to a sense of his wrongs. "If only Mrs. Honeysett hadn't opened the door just when she did, we should know exactly where the treasure was. It was the West Tower they took it to, wasn't it?" "I'm not sure," said Elfrida, and if it had gone on, we should have been sure, and we should have seen them come away again." "Yes," said Elfrida, and again she remarked, "I say." Edred again said, "Well?" "Well, suppose we looked in the chests. We should be sure to find clothes like those, and then we should be back there, living in those times, and we could see the treasure put away, and then we really should know." "A1, first class, ripping," was Edred's enthusiastic rejoinder. "Come on, I'll race you to the gate." Sorry, I'm just checking something. Yes, I know you really, really, really want to find out what happens next. "I'll race you to the gate." He did race her, and won by about 30 white Mouldiwarp's lengths. There had been no quarrel now for quite a long time, if you count as time the days spent in the gunpowder plot adventure. So the attic was easily found, and once more the children stood among the chests, with the dusty roof and the dusty sunbeams and the clittering pigeon feet and the soft pigeon noises overhead, Come on, cried Elfrida joyously. I shall know the dress directly I see it. Mine was blue silk with sloping shoulders, and yours was black velvet and a Vandyke collar. Together they flung back the lid of a chest they had not yet opened. It held clothes far richer than any they had seen yet. I'm just going to check. Okay, now this is where I have to actually find the picture because I'm pretty sure that the next picture is here. Just put it in the right place so you can see it behind me instead of having to look through me. Here you go. And the caption on it, it held clothes far richer than any they had seen yet. They're looking in this chest. Magnificent chest, isn't it? Together they flung back the lid of a chest they had not yet opened. It held clothes far richer than any they had seen yet. The doublets and cloaks and bodices were stiff with gold embroidery and jewels, but there was no blue silk dress with sloping shoulders, and no black velvet suit, and Vandyke collar. I think that's the ones where it's flat fabric with the lace on the edge. Let's find out, shall we? Vandyke collar. Vandyke collar. A form of... No, let's find it. A good definition. A large white collar with several very deep points. Okay. A wide collar of lace and linen with edge formed into scallops or deep points. That's the form that I was thinking of. Let's see if we can find a picture for you of a Vandyke collar. I found a picture, but it's not the right one because it's on a stock photo site, which means it's going to have writing all over it. And now it's also giving me photos of Dick Van Dyke wearing a shirt with a collar, which is not the style I was looking for. Hang on, let's see if I can find a better version. Oh, that one as well. Come on. Stop giving me ones that are on stock sites. I know the exact type of collar that I'm looking for, sorry. Let's see if this one is. Ah, I see now why they called it that. Right, the picture I'm going to show you is captioned thus. Portrait of Charles I from 3 angles by Anthony Van Dyck, D-Y-C-K. Features both a Van Dyke beard and a Van Dyke collar. And I shall find you the picture. So if you wait just a moment. And I have to resize it because it's a huge image compared with the rest of the ones that we've got. No! Sorry, I just accidentally clicked slightly differently to what I was meant to be clicking. And here we go. Van Dyke beard. It's basically a goatee. So it's hair here and then a pointy bit of hair through the middle of it. It probably also normally comes with the moustache like he's got here. This is the Van Dyke collar. So here it looks like it's linen stitch work done, linen. The main collar is linen with stitching done onto it like embroidery, and then it has a lace edge. I'll see if I can make it a bit bigger so you can... No! Come back. I don't know why it does that. For some reason when I stretch it one way it gets confused. So you can see there the details. So it's fabric up here cloth, and then here it's lace, and it looks like it goes from one to the other by having stitch work done, like embroidery done on there with white, and then coming through to the lace. So that's a Van Dyke collar, these great big huge collars like this behind me. There you go. So now you know. We'll carry on with reading the story. That's the way. Sorry, I need to get that back to where it was meant to be so I can just keep an eye on things. There was no blue silk dress with sloping shoulders and no black velvet suit and Van Dyke collar. Oh, never mind, said Edred, bundling the splendid clothes back by double armfuls. Yeah, very interesting. Just looking at the sort of clothing. I love how the author has actually taken different periods of history and not only talked about historically what was happening, but also given enough description that we can visualize it, because anyone from my generation or older has probably seen prints of the paintings that these sort of illustrations are from. And so we actually then start to pull together these different threads of information and see how they all fit together. Right. I'm going to carry on again. Sorry, I'm just getting easily distracted. Never mind, said Edred, bundling the splendid clothes back by double armfuls. Help me to smooth these down so that the lid will shut properly, and we'll try the next chest. But the lid would not shut at all till Elfrida had taken all the things out and folded them properly, and then it shut quite easily. Funny that. Then they went on to the next chest. I've just realised my camera is looking a little bit odd because it's cutting off the top of my head. There you go. No, I'm still reading. I just paused between sentences. I'm going to carry on reading. I just had somebody ask me if I was still reading, if I'd finished. Then they went on to the next chest. I have a magic inside feeling that they're in this one, said Elfrida happily. And so they may have been. The children never knew, for the next chest was locked. And the utmost efforts of 4 small arms failed to move the lid a hair's breadth. Oh, bother, said Edred. We'll try the next. But the next was locked too, and the next, and the one after that, and the one beyond, and, well, the fact is they were all locked. I think maybe they're locked unless they're meant to be the one that they're using. What do you think? The children looked at each other in something quite like despair. I feel, said the boy, like a baffled burglar. I feel, said the girl, as if I was just going to understand something. Oh, wait a minute, it's coming, I think, she said. She added very slowly, I think it means if we go anywhere, we've got to go wherever it was they wore those glorious stiff gold clothes. That's where the chest's open for. That's what the others are locked for. See? Good thinking. Then let's go and put them on, said Edred. I don't think I want any more Tower of Londons, said Elfrida doubtfully. I don't mind what it is, said Edred. I've found out one thing. We always come safe out of it, whatever it is. And besides, he added, sorry, my nose really is having an itchy time this afternoon. Maybe using the texture of the wool on my top will help. And besides, he added, remembering many talks with his good friend Sir Walter Raleigh, an English gentleman must be afraid of nothing save God and his conscience. All right, said Elfrida, laying hands on the chest lid that hid the golden splendour. You might help, she said, but Edred couldn't. He laid hands on the chest, of course, and he pulled and Elfrida pulled. But the chest lid was as fast now as any of the others. Done in the eye, said Edred. It was a very vulgar expression, and I can't think where he picked it up. He that will not when he may, he shall not when he would. Ah, said Elfrida, and I do know where she learned that. It's from an old song Mrs. Honeysett used to sing when she blackleaded the stoves. Blackleading is where you put a particular coating on that it's not paint, it copes with the heat, but it helps to keep the stove from getting all rusty and nasty. Anyway, so she was doing some uncomfortable work and she would keep herself occupied by singing while she was doing it. I suppose we must chuck it for today, said Edred when he had quite hurt his fingers by trying all the chests once more and had found that every single one was shut tight as wax. Come on, we'll print the photographs. But the films were not dry enough. They never are when you just expect them to be, so they locked They locked the still room door on the outside and hung the key on a nail high up in the kitchen chimney. Mrs. Honeysett was not in the kitchen at that moment, but she came hurrying in the next. Here you are, my lambs, she said cheerily, and just in time for the surprise. Oh, I'd forgotten the surprise. Sorry. That makes two of it, doesn't it? Said Elfrida. Do tell us what it is. We need a nice surprise to make up for everything, if you only knew. Ah, said Mrs. Honeysett. You mean because of me opening that there door? Well, there is two surprises. One's roast chicken. For supper, she added impressively. So what that means is normally they have that nice meal in the middle of the day, not in the evening. Then I know the other, said Edred. Aunt Edith's coming. And she was, indeed. At that very moment, as they looked through the window, they saw her blue dress coming over the hill and joyously tore out to meet her. It was after the roast chicken, when it was nearly dark and almost bedtime, that Aunt Edith said suddenly, Children, there's something I wanted to tell you. I've hesitated about it a good deal, but I think we oughtn't to have any secrets from each other. Edred and Elfrida exchanged guilty glances because they've been keeping secrets. Not real secrets, of course, said Edred hastily, but you don't mind our having magic secrets, do you? Of course not, said Aunt Edith, smiling, and what I'm going to tell you is rather like magic, if it's true. I don't know yet whether it's true or not. Interesting. Here Aunt Edith put an arm around each of the children as they sat on the broad window seat and swallowed something in her throat and sniffed. It's not bad news, is it? Elfrida cried. Oh, darling auntie, don't be miserable and don't say that they've found out that Arden isn't ours or that Edred isn't really Lord Arden or something. Would you mind so very much, said Aunt Edith gently, if you weren't Lord Arden, Edred? Because... And that's the end of the chapter. Oh no, what's going to happen? Oh, that's a cliffhanger ending. And no, I've just had a quick look at the beginning of the next chapter and it doesn't resolve straight away. Oh my goodness. Oh, yeah, absolutely gasp. That's right. And I'm not going to start the next chapter because it's too long. Oh, we'll have to come back next time and listen to the rest of this, the next, and listen to the whole of the next chapter and find out what happens. So I will tell you this. The next chapter, chapter 12, is called Films and Clouds. Ooh, interesting. Films and Clouds. Oh my goodness. What's going to happen next? I have no idea. She's outdone herself on this book. Seriously, I think she's actually really, really starting to just sort of get us hooked. I hope the sequel is as good as this one. I never know with these books because they're all so different to each other. Cliffhangers on cliffhangers. Absolutely. It's like, oh, how could you make it more suspenseful? I'll tell you how. And then she goes and does it. So what's going to happen next? I don't know. I really don't know. Anyway, we've come to the end of today's chapter. I'm not going to start reading the next one because it's too long. And I've loved having you here with me to discover what happens next. Yeah, it can't be as bad as a movie sequel. Hopefully, it's not a letdown like the way movie sequels, especially the second one. If there's a series of three, is usually the second one is a bit lame. The third one is often a bit of a pickup compared with the second one. But this one, this book series only has two books in it, so hopefully it's a good one. We'll find out. I don't know. Anyway, thank you for being here with me. Thank you for putting up with all the suspense and the interruptions and the me getting lost on the page and everything. I really do enjoy having you here for the story reads. It's great. And finding out about all sorts of different things that we may or may not have heard about before. And do you know what a manglewoozle is yet? I did ask before. I think I've asked every time in this book. Great to have you here, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Don't forget to join the Discord. There you go. There's the Discord link for those of you who need it. So come and join us on the Discord server. Leave some messages, make some comments, say what you think is going to happen next in the story. There you go. And we'll see you next time. And in the meantime, happy reading. Bye.